Every day of your life, you are giving commands in silence. You give them when you rise in the morning and decide whether the day is a burden or an opportunity. You give them when you look at money and think in terms of fear or stewardship. You give them when you face difficulty and call it proof of defeat or part of your preparation. You give them when you speak of yourself as weak, late, unlucky, confused, or when you speak of yourself as a man who can learn, govern, build, and endure. You may think these are only passing thoughts, but they are not. They are instructions. They are seeds. They are repeated inner orders being handed to a power within you that never stops listening. That power is your subconscious mind. It does not rest. It does not debate. It does not ask whether what you are saying is wise enough to obey. It receives, accepts, and begins shaping your life around the thoughts you feed it most often. This is why the law must be understood with seriousness. Your subconscious mind obeys the thoughts that create success. Most men do not fail because life refused them. They fail because they spend years training their own inner life to expect less than what they say they want. They ask for peace while mentally rehearsing conflict. They ask for prosperity while mentally rehearsing shortage. They ask for confidence while constantly picturing embarrassment. They ask for discipline while inwardly describing themselves as men who never stay with anything long enough to matter. Then when their habits begin reflecting those inner instructions, they call it personality, fate, bad luck, or just the way things are. But life is often not merely giving them random conditions. It is responding to the pattern they have kept impressing upon the deeper mind. Now understand this clearly. The subconscious mind is not your enemy. It is your servant. But a servant without judgment can become dangerous in the hands of a foolish master. If you repeatedly tell it that life is always hard, that money is unstable, that you never follow through, that people like you never really get ahead, then it begins helping to make those ideas feel natural. Not because it hates you, but because it has been trained to treat repetition as authority. The subconscious takes what is repeated with emotion and begins treating it as the pattern to preserve. This is why careless inner talk is so expensive. Men keep speaking weakness over themselves, then act surprised when their hand becomes weak. They keep describing themselves as anxious, scattered, behind, undisciplined, or doomed to repeat the same old patterns, and the deeper mind begins organizing the day around those descriptions. That is why repeated thought is never small. Thought becomes expectation. Expectation becomes attitude. Attitude becomes behavior. Behavior becomes habit. Habit becomes condition. Condition becomes life. This is the chain. A man may not notice it at first because the changes are subtle. He says, "I'm always behind." And at first it seems like nothing more than a phrase. But then he begins moving like a delayed man. He postpones what matters, starts late, works under pressure instead of under order, and feels almost comfortable in the rush because the deeper mind has already accepted that pressure is normal. He says, "Money never stays with me," and then starts spending like a man who expects instability. He says, "I always fall off," and then his own hand begins acting as if returning to weakness were simply part of the schedule. The subconscious mind is faithful to what it hears most often. And this is where the battle over success truly begins. Not in what you occasionally wish for, but in what you repeatedly declare inwardly as normal, lawful, and expected. Many people admire success while privately expecting failure. They enjoy the sound of growth while secretly trusting collapse more than increase. They speak of stronger lives while inwardly seeing themselves as temporary visitors in anything good. Then the moment peace appears, they disturb it. The moment money appears, they leak it. The moment order begins taking hold, they loosen it. Why? Because the subconscious was never truly taught that these better conditions were safe, rightful, and meant to remain. The outer life touched something stronger, but the inner life still bowed to an older script. That older script is often inherited. A man may have been raised around tension, lack, complaint, delay, low expectations, or waste. He heard the same sentences long before he understood their power. He saw the same emotional responses to money, opportunity, conflict, responsibility, and ambition. He absorbed the same fear. He learned the same hesitation. He watched older people treat discipline like punishment, wealth like danger, peace like something fragile, and growth like something other men get to enjoy. Then, years later, he becomes an adult and assumes all of this is simply who he is. But much of it is not identity. It is programming. And programming can be interrupted. That is one of the most hopeful truths in the world. You may not have chosen the first messages you received, but you are not required to keep repeating them. You are not required to keep handing your subconscious the language of limitation. You are not required to keep imagining yourself under the same ceiling. You are not required to keep strengthening the same old fears every morning. The mind can be retrained. The deeper self can be re-educated. But not through vague wishing, not through one emotional decision, not through slogans spoken without obedience. It is retrained through repeated, lawful, disciplined thought, joined to repeated, lawful, disciplined action. This is where many go wrong. They hear that thoughts matter and assume this means they should simply say pleasant things while continuing to live disorderly lives. That is not transformation. That is performance. The subconscious is not moved by empty recital for long. It is moved by dominant patterns. If you say, I am becoming disciplined, but then spend the whole day indulging confusion, delay, weak speech, and self-pity, the stronger sentence has no root. The subconscious sees which message is truly ruling. It pays close attention to what is repeated in ordinary conditions. It listens to what you say under fatigue, under pressure, under disappointment, under temptation, under plainness. Those moments reveal what the real inward instruction is. That is why strong thinking must be paired with strong conduct. The deeper mind must hear the better thought and see the better action. It must hear, this life is governed, and then watch you govern it. It must hear, money is directed here, and then watch you direct it. It must hear, peace belongs in this house, and then watch you stop inviting chaos into the room just because chaos feels familiar. It must hear, I return quickly after weakness, and then watch you actually return instead of spending 3 days in shame. This combination of repeated thought and repeated proof is what begins changing the deeper pattern. Without proof, many good thoughts remain visitors. With proof, they begin becoming law. Now, one of the most powerful things the subconscious obeys is emotional imagery. What you picture inwardly with enough repetition and feeling begins teaching the deeper mind what to expect. If you picture yourself failing, shrinking, overspending, breaking, being exposed, being left behind, then those images do not stay harmless. They begin becoming instructions. Your body starts preparing for them. Your speech starts shrinking toward them. Your decisions start accommodating them. But if you picture yourself rising in order, directing money cleanly, speaking with composure, keeping law in ordinary conditions, recovering quickly after mistakes, and building patiently without drama, then the subconscious begins aligning your instincts around that image as well. This is why imagination is so powerful. It is not a childish luxury. It is one of the ways deeper instruction is formed. Most men use imagination against themselves. They rehearse disaster. They revisit old humiliations. They preview failure before they have even begun. They give the subconscious picture after picture of why things probably will not work. Then, when the opportunity comes, their hand shakes and their courage feels late. Of course it does. The inner servant has already been told what world it lives in. It has been told to prepare for collapse. This is why mental discipline matters so much. You must stop allowing fear to paint the walls of your future and then acting surprised when your life begins taking that shape. This does not mean you become dishonest. It does not mean you deny weakness, risk, or pain. It means you stop making weakness the master narrative. You stop turning temporary struggle into permanent identity. You stop saying, "I always fail," when the truth is, "I have failed here before and now must learn a stronger law." You stop saying money never stays, when the truth is, my hand must be retrained in stewardship. You stop saying, "I'm just not disciplined," when the truth is, I have been governed by weaker habits and can be retrained through repeated law. This kind of inner honesty is far more useful than self-condemnation. It corrects without cursing. It instructs without wounding the will. And the will matters deeply, because a man whose subconscious has been fed too much inner contempt often grows divided against himself. He wants to improve, but inwardly he expects collapse. He wants peace, but inwardly he trusts chaos more. He wants more money, but inwardly he still behaves like a man who is more comfortable leaking than holding. This division is exhausting. It makes progress feel heavier than it should. Then the man says life is hard, when often much of the hardness comes from the fact that his conscious desires and subconscious instructions are fighting each other every day. This is why the great work is unity. One direction, one law, one inner agreement. The thought you repeat must match the life you are building. The life you are building must reinforce the thought you repeat. If you say you are becoming a steward, then act like one. If you say peace belongs in your life, then govern the door. If you say you can become disciplined, then stop waiting to feel dramatic before obeying what matters. The subconscious loves clarity. It begins helping when the message stops changing with every mood. Now, because this law is so exact, environment becomes crucial. What voices do you keep letting speak into you? What attitudes about money, peace, work, and discipline do you keep hearing? What stories about failure, lack, and human weakness do you keep living around? Repeated atmosphere becomes repeated thought. Repeated thought becomes inner expectation. If a man keeps breathing the air of smallness, then the deeper mind keeps learning smallness as normal. This is why a serious man becomes careful. He does not let every bitter voice, every fearful opinion, every lazy philosophy, every cynical joke, and every weak example keep writing on the walls of his inner world. He knows the subconscious listens to repeated atmosphere whether he intended it or not. And because the subconscious listens, the man who wants success must speak differently within himself. He must begin telling the deeper mind the truth that creates strength. This mind can be governed. This hand can be trusted. This day has order. This life is not required to repeat old collapse. My future is not bound to old fear. I can build slowly and still build strongly. Peace can remain when it is guarded. Money can grow when it is directed. Discipline can become natural through repetition. These are not empty charms. They are instructions. They tell the subconscious what kind of life is now to be prepared for. So stop talking to your subconscious like a defeated man, and then asking your life why it lacks strength. Stop feeding it collapse and then praying for increase. Stop giving it fear and then asking it for courage. Begin feeding it the thoughts that create success. thoughts of law, stewardship, order, patient building, self-command, and quiet confidence rooted in repeated action. Then return to them until they are no longer occasional thoughts, but the dominant language of your inner world. Because once that language changes, the servant within begins working with you instead of against you. And when that happens, success is no longer something you merely admire from a distance. It becomes something your whole inner life is finally learning how to build. Now, once you understand that the subconscious mind takes repeated thought as instruction, the next truth becomes even more important. It does not only obey what you say in calm moments, it obeys what you believe in emotional moments. This is where many men lose power without realizing it. They think their darkest thoughts do not matter because they only speak them when they are tired, discouraged, offended, embarrassed, or under strain. But those are often the very moments when the deeper mind is listening most closely. Why? Because emotion gives force to thought. A cold sentence may pass lightly through the mind, but a hot sentence sinks. A fearful thought repeated with feeling becomes a deep order. A defeated picture rehearsed in pain becomes a strong impression. A sentence spoken in shame, if repeated often enough, can become a law in the hidden chambers of the mind. Then the man spends the next months living under an instruction he gave himself in one moment of undisciplined emotion. This is why a man must become very careful, not only in what he says when he feels strong, but in what he says when he feels weak. A weak man says, "I always ruin things," after one mistake. A wiser man says, "That was foolish, but it does not define the whole road." A weak man says, "Nothing ever works for me," after one disappointment. A wiser man says, "This is slow, but slowness is not failure." A weak man says, "I'll probably lose this too," the moment something good begins. A wiser man says, "This will remain if I keep governing what matters." In both cases, the subconscious hears and obeys. But one set of thought trains collapse, while the other trains continuity. That is why mastery of the inner life requires more than occasional optimism. It requires disciplined interpretation. You must learn how to interpret events in ways that strengthen rather than weaken the deeper mind. The same setback can program defeat in one man and greater sobriety in another. The same criticism can program humiliation in one man and sharper excellence in another. The same slow season can program despair in one man and patience in another. The difference is not only in the event. The difference is in the inner command the man gives afterward. The subconscious obeys the command. So if you want stronger outcomes, you must become stronger in interpretation. This matters deeply because most of life is not lived in dramatic moments. It is lived in small decisions shaped by repeated interpretation. A delay comes. What does it mean? A weekday comes. What does it mean? Money feels tight. What does it mean? Someone doubts you. What does it mean? A plan takes longer than expected. What does it mean? If your subconscious has been trained to connect these things with personal failure, then each one weakens your posture. But if it has been trained to connect them with correction, patience, law, and process, then they do not crush you so quickly. This is why two men can face the same conditions and produce completely different futures. One keeps feeding his subconscious the language of collapse. The other keeps feeding it the language of structure. Now, let us come closer to the practical side of the matter. Many people assume that the subconscious only responds to large and dramatic statements. Not so. It also responds to repeated small statements that become part of your daily tone. I'm exhausted. I'm behind. I don't know if I can do this. I'm terrible with money. I'm just not one of those disciplined people. That kind of success is not for me. These phrases seem common enough. They are often spoken casually. But because they are repeated, they begin acting like grooves in the mind. The subconscious begins traveling down them more easily. Then, one day, the man's whole outlook sounds like those phrases. His hand, his habits, his money, his energy, his confidence, even his face begins wearing the shape of what he has been saying for years. This is why careless self-description is one of the costliest habits in the world. A man keeps speaking weakness and then wonders why strength feels foreign. He keeps describing himself as unstable and then wonders why peace feels temporary. He keeps telling himself he never finishes and then wonders why he keeps stopping in the middle. The subconscious has been taught what kind of man he is. It is simply trying to make the life agree with the description. That is why stronger language is not vanity. It is responsibility. If you keep calling yourself broken, late, weak, or doomed to repeat old patterns, then you are not being humble. You are often programming defeat. Now, stronger language does not mean empty boasting. It does not mean standing in a room and pretending you have mastered what you have barely begun. That would be foolish and brittle. Stronger language means speaking truth in a way that serves correction instead of collapse. It means saying, I am learning discipline instead of, I will never be disciplined. It means saying, I mishandled that money and now I will govern the next decision instead of, I am hopeless with money. It means saying, I had a weak day and I return now instead of, I always ruin my progress. That difference may seem small to a careless mind. It is not small to the subconscious. One trains continuity. The other trains surrender. And the subconscious is always leaning toward whatever has been repeated with authority. That is why authority matters. Not all thoughts enter with equal strength. The thoughts you repeat with conviction, fear, shame, desire, anger, or faith sink deeper. This is why emotional episodes can be so formative. A man loses money, gets humiliated, is criticized, or faces a hard season, and in the heat of that pain, he begins making sweeping declarations about himself and life. I knew I'd fail. This proves I'm not meant for more. People like me don't really rise. Nothing good stays. I'll always be one step behind. Those statements are poison because they mix pain with identity. They give the subconscious a dramatic script to obey. Then the next chapter begins bending toward that script. This is why a strong man disciplines himself most carefully in seasons of pain. Not because pain makes him less human, but because pain makes the mind more impressionable. He knows that a sentence spoken in deep discouragement can become a chain if repeated often enough. So he learns to suffer with lull. He can admit, this hurts. This is slower than I wanted. This exposed weakness in me. But he will not move from honesty into self-prophecy. He will not turn pain into a verdict. He will not tell the deeper mind that one hard moment is the pattern of the whole life. This refusal protects the future. Now, let us go deeper into the relationship between the subconscious and expectation. Expectation is one of the most powerful forms of inner programming because it shapes how the whole being approaches tomorrow. A man expecting failure moves differently. He hesitates. He overthinks. He conserves force in the wrong places. He becomes too defensive or too eager to please. He prepares excuses before he prepares excellence. A man expecting disciplined success under law moves differently too. He still feels the unknown, but he prepares with more steadiness. He protects his prime energy. He thinks more clearly because he is not rehearsing disaster all morning. He treats the day like material instead of threat. This difference begins before the event. It begins in expectation. So now the question becomes direct. What are you expecting? Not what do you hope in a sentimental moment. What do you actually expect when you think about your future in the quiet? Do you expect the old struggle to reappear? Do you expect money to leak? Do you expect peace to break? Do you expect yourself to abandon the habit after a few days? Do you expect people to dismiss you? Do you expect to fail just enough times to confirm your worst opinions about yourself? If so, understand what is happening. The subconscious is being taught to prepare for those things, and preparation changes posture. Posture changes conduct. Conduct changes result. This is why expectation must be retrained just as seriously as habit must be retrained. You must begin expecting law to work, expecting the stronger morning to matter, expecting the guarded dollar to remain, expecting the cleaner word to build trust, expecting the repeated return after weakness to become a new pattern, expecting peace to strengthen if it is protected. These expectations do not make life magical. They make life aligned. They stop forcing the outer man to fight against an inner servant that has been trained for the wrong world. Now, mental pictures matter greatly here, too. A man's subconscious responds strongly to the images he keeps seeing inwardly. If he keeps picturing lack, the subconscious begins behaving as though lack is the natural environment. If he keeps picturing himself embarrassed, overpowered, and late, the subconscious begins shaping posture and reactions toward that end. If he keeps picturing himself orderly, calm, disciplined, and capable of carrying a stronger life, then something different begins happening. The deeper mind starts helping him remain there. It starts making those actions less foreign. It starts reducing the internal resistance. This is why imagination must be governed. Imagination is not a toy. It is one of the ways the future is rehearsed before it appears. Most men rehearse the wrong future. They picture disaster before they picture preparation. They picture criticism before they picture composure. They picture spending before they picture stewardship. They picture themselves giving way before they picture themselves standing. Then, when the real moment comes, their subconscious has already been drilled in retreat. This is why inner rehearsal matters. See the stronger response. See yourself acting under law. See yourself keeping the budget, starting the work, remaining calm, refusing the indulgence, returning after weakness. These images are powerful because they begin teaching the deeper mind what is now normal. But again, image alone is not enough. Action must confirm the command. If you tell the subconscious, "We are becoming disciplined," but your day keeps proving the opposite, then confusion remains. If you tell it, "Peace belongs here," but then keep feeding inner arguments, emotional noise, and needless chaos, then the message is mixed. If you tell it, "Money will be governed," but then keep spending to soothe insecurity, then the old instruction still rules. The subconscious is not fooled by performance. It watches what is repeated in deed. This is why action is one of the strongest forms of mental programming. Every act says, "This is what we do now." Repeated acts say, "This is who we are becoming." That is why returning quickly after weakness matters so much. A weak man stumbles and then gives the subconscious a whole sermon of shame, defeat, and hopelessness. A stronger man stumbles and gives the subconscious a new lesson. We return. We correct. We do not make one weak act into an atmosphere. This teaches resilience. And resilience is one of the most important traits the subconscious can learn. A man whose deeper mind has learned recovery becomes far more dangerous to failure than a man who only knows intensity. Intensity starts well. Recovery stays alive. Now, environment also continues to matter at this level. If you live around fear, sarcasm, small expectation, and emotional waste, Your subconscious is hearing those tones whether you intend it or not. The room teaches. The conversation teaches. The repeated joke teaches. The constant complaint teaches. That is why you must become more protective of your atmosphere. You cannot keep asking the deeper mind to build one world while constantly surrounding it with the language of another. If success is to be trained into the inner life, then defeat must stop being entertained like an old relative who is allowed to visit whenever he likes. This is not rigidity. It is stewardship. A man must know what he is allowing to write on his inner walls. He must know what kind of future the atmosphere around him is always teaching. Because the subconscious absorbs more than many people admit. It is influenced by rhythm, tone, repetition, and emotional climate. This is why serious men become more selective over time. Not because they are delicate, but because they understand law. Repeated atmosphere becomes repeated thought. Repeated thought becomes command. Command becomes conduct. Conduct becomes life. And so the command for this part becomes plain. Stop feeding the subconscious double messages. Stop speaking hope in one breath and rehearsing defeat in the next. Stop imagining peace while emotionally living in noise. Stop asking for increase while inwardly remaining loyal to shortage. Choose one message: law, order, stewardship, strong return, patient building, peace that is guarded, discipline that remains. Then repeat it in thought, emotion, speech, and action until the servant within begins moving the whole life in that direction with greater and greater strength. That is how success becomes less of a wish and more of a pattern your inner life now knows how to obey. And once you begin giving your subconscious clear instructions, the next lesson arrives with greater force than the first. The subconscious does not build from what you occasionally admire. It builds from what you repeatedly authorize. That is where many men fail. They admire success, but they still authorize fear. They admire peace, but they still authorize inner noise. They admire wealth, but they still authorize careless spending, small expectation, and the private belief that money is always one step away from leaving. They admire discipline, but they still authorize delay by telling themselves they will begin when they feel stronger. Then they wonder why the deeper mind keeps serving the weaker life. It keeps serving it because the weaker life still has official permission. That word matters. Permission. Much of what destroys men does not rule them by force. It rules them by repeated permission. They permit the same thoughts to sit in the chair of authority. They permit the same images of collapse to remain vivid. They permit the same private language of inferiority, lateness, exhaustion, and defeat. They permit themselves to rehearse the same bitter memories until those memories start sounding like prophecy. And once the subconscious hears enough of this, it begins preserving that atmosphere as if it were home. Then when the man reaches for something better, some deeper part of him feels uneasy because the better thing does not yet have full inward permission to stay. This is why many men can visit stronger seasons but not inhabit them. They can feel inspired for a week. They can keep the standard for a month. They can handle money well for a little while. They can enjoy a quiet season, a disciplined stretch, a cleaner mind, a more ordered life. But then they drift back, not always because they wanted to fail, but because the deeper mind had not yet been taught that this stronger life was normal, lawful, and safe to live in. The old emotional world still felt more familiar, and the subconscious, like a faithful servant to familiar patterns, kept pulling the whole life back toward what it had known longest. So now the work becomes more serious. You are not merely trying to think better thoughts. You are trying to make the stronger thoughts feel rightful enough that the subconscious stops treating them like strangers. That takes repetition. It takes emotional honesty. And it takes one more thing that many people resist: consistency without spectacle. Because the deeper mind is shaped more by what is done repeatedly than by what is done dramatically. One day of perfect effort means little if it is followed by 6 days of inner surrender. One strong declaration means little if the rest of the week is full of fear-soaked mental rehearsal. The subconscious respects constancy. It learns from the pattern that stays. This is why ordinary days matter so much. They matter more than many of the dramatic days. In dramatic moments, almost anyone can become intense. Intensity is cheap when pressure is loud. But what do you tell yourself on the plain morning? What do you believe on the quiet afternoon when no crisis is pushing you? What thought owns the room when the day feels ordinary, the process feels slow, and no visible reward is cheering you on? That thought matters because it is often the thought that reveals who the subconscious is actually obeying. If on those days you keep returning to order, stewardship, patience, law, and self-command, the deeper mind begins learning that these things are not emergency measures. They are the shape of life. That is when reprogramming becomes real. Now, let us speak about the hidden link between the subconscious and identity. Repeated thought becomes self-definition. A man thinks of himself in certain terms long enough, and those terms begin becoming invisible instructions for the whole life. I'm always struggling. I never get ahead. I'm one of those people who starts but doesn't finish. I'm not naturally disciplined. I can handle pressure, but I can't really handle peace. Money stays with other people. These are not merely observations. They are identity statements. And once identity is handed to the subconscious often enough, the subconscious starts defending it. That is why men sometimes sabotage progress just when it begins threatening the old identity. They are not always consciously rejecting good things. They are protecting a familiar self-concept. This is one reason change can feel so strange. It is not only new behavior. It is the burial of an old internal identity. If a man has secretly known himself as a struggler, then stability will feel foreign at first. If he has known himself as a man ruled by urgency, then calm order will feel almost suspicious. If he has known himself as one who always leaks money, then saving with consistency may feel less like wisdom at first and more like unnatural restraint. This is why the subconscious must be taught not only through ideas, but through repeated evidence. The deeper mind must see that the old identity is no longer the law of the house. That evidence comes from conduct under pressure, not speeches, conduct. When pressure rises and you still do not spend emotionally, the subconscious notices. When disappointment comes and you still do not narrate your whole life in the language of defeat, the subconscious notices. When peace arrives and you do not provoke old chaos just to feel familiar again, the subconscious notices. When you make a mistake and still return quickly instead of disappearing into shame, the subconscious notices. These things are lessons. They say this is who we are becoming now. They say the old pattern is losing rights. And the deeper mind, hearing and seeing this often enough, slowly begins shifting allegiance. Now there is something else you must understand. The subconscious obeys not only what you say about yourself, but what you say about life itself. If you keep saying, everything is hard, nothing stays, people always disappoint, there's never enough, success changes people for the worse, then you are not merely forming opinions. You are teaching your deeper mind what kind of world to expect. And the world you expect is often the world you become prepared to live in. A suspicious man creates tense relationships. A scarcity-minded man creates anxious financial behavior. A man who expects disappointment often enters promising situations with guarded weakness instead of open, disciplined strength. Then life appears to confirm what he already believed. The confirmation was often helped along by the subconscious preparation. This is why successful thinking is not merely about yourself. It is also about the world you inwardly consent to live in. Is it a world in which effort matters,